The afternoon sun glared against the cold silver walls of the factory, its brightness mocking the pain that lingered on the ground below. A small doll lay broken on the dusty pavement, its arm twisted and face smeared with dirt. A silent witness to the chaos that had unfolded moments earlier. Nearby, a young woman struggled to rise, her blonde hair tangled, her lips split, and one cheek already turning purple. Her daughter, a little girl no older than 6, stood trembling beside her, clutching the damaged doll to her chest. Her wide, tear-filled eyes darted between her injured mother and the road that led away from the factory. The road where the men who had hurt them had just fled, laughing. If you believe in kindness, in standing up for those who can't stand alone, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to USA Call. Your support helps us keep these real, heart-touching stories alive for everyone who still believes in second chances. The mother's name was Clara, a young widow trying to hold her world together with nothing but love and willpower. She worked endless shifts at the Weldon Auto Components factory, barely earning enough to cover rent and keep food on the table for her daughter, Hazel. But she never complained, not once. Every morning, she'd tie Hazel's little yellow ribbons and promise her, someday things will get better. Hazel believed her, because when you're 6, you believe every promise that comes from your mother's trembling smile. But that day, everything broke. Both a toy and something inside them. Clara had found out that the factory manager and his men had been underpaying her for months, taking advantage of her desperation. When she finally confronted them, they laughed. When she begged, one of them shoved her against the wall. And when Hazel ran in, clutching her little doll and shouting for them to stop, one of the men snatched the toy from her tiny hands, ripped off its arm, and threw it into the dirt. Tente left, leaving a bruised mother and a sobbing child under the open sky. Clara tried to stay strong. She wiped the blood from her lip and whispered, "It's okay, baby. Mommy's fine." Though her voice trembled with pain, Hazel didn't speak. She just stood there holding her broken toy, her tears dripping silently onto the pavement. But fate, it seemed, had other plans for them that day, because just then, the distant rumble of engines began to fill the air. The sound grew louder, deeper, until it became a thunder that shook the street. Hazel turned her head and saw them, 5 bikers, their chrome Harleys gleaming under the afternoon light, their black vests marked with the red-winged skull that read Hell's Angels. They slowed as they approached, their leader cutting the engine first. He was older, rugged, with sultan pepper hair and a thick beard, tattoos curling down his arms like stories carved in ink. His vest read RL, chills. When he stepped off his bike, the world seemed to pause. He didn't need to ask what had happened. It was written all over the scene. Clara's trembling hands, Hazel's shattered doll, and the bruise spreading across the young woman's cheek. The biker's jaw tightened. He lowered himself to one knee, so he was eye level with Hazel. His voice, though deep and gruff, carried an unexpected gentleness as he asked softly with his eyes, "Who did this?" Hazel lifted her tiny hand and pointed toward the factory. Behind him, the other bikers exchanged silent looks. The kind of look men share when words are no longer needed. The leader stood slowly, his leather vest catching the light as the engines behind him idled low and steady. His shadow stretched long across the cracked pavement, reaching the factory gates like a silent warning. He gave a single nod, a wordless command. And in perfect unison, the other bikers mounted their bikes. Clara, still trembling, found a voice. "Wait. Please." "Don't," she called out. But her words were lost beneath the roar of engines. The 5 men turned their bikes toward the factory, their tires grinding over the gravel as they accelerated. The sound was deafening. Part thunder, part fury, part justice. Hazel clutched her mother's hand as they watched the bikers disappear through the open gate. The wind kicked up dust, swirling around the broken doll on the ground. Clara's heart pounded with fear, but deep down, a small spark of something else flickered hope. Inside the factory, the laughter had stopped. Workers stood frozen as the 5 riders entered, engines rumbling low like growling beasts. The factory manager, a tall man with slicked back hair and a fake smile, tried to steady himself. He stepped forward, forcing a smirk. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he asked, voice tight. The leader said nothing. He dismounted, his boots striking the concrete with a heavy thud. He walked forward, slow and deliberate, his eyes never leaving the man's face. The air seemed to thicken with every step. One of the workers whispered, "That's RL Chills from the Hellas Angels." The manager's confidence cracked. If this is about that woman, she was out of line. "We run a tight operation here." Before he could finish, the biker stopped inches from his face. His voice was calm, quiet, almost too quiet. "You hurt a mother. You scared a kid?" The manager's smirk vanished. "What happens next?" the biker said. "Is your choice." No one knows exactly what words came after that. Some say there was shouting. Others swore they heard the sound of metal hitting the floor. But what everyone remembered most was how quickly the factory fell silent. Outside, Clara stood gripping Hazel's shoulders. Minutes passed. Then the sound came again. The roar of vengeance, steady and strong. The bikers emerged from the factory gates, faces hard but calm. Behind them, the workers stood watching in stunned silence. The manager and his men were nowhere to be seen. Clara's breath caught in her throat as the riders stopped beside her. The leader reached into his vest pocket and pulled out something small, a nude doll, its blue dress fluttering in the wind. He knelt down again and handed it to Hazel. The little girl stared at it through her tears, then looked up at him whispering, "Thank you." He nodded once, then took out an envelope thick with cash and placed it gently in Clara's hand. "I can't take this," she said, her voice breaking. He just shook his head. He'd been through enough. For a long moment, no one spoke. The sun dipped lower, painting the road in golden fire. Then the bikers mounted their motorcycles, engines rumbling like thunder, ready to roll again. Before leaving, the leader turned once more to Hazel. The little girl managed a shaky smile, clutching her new doll close to her chest. He gave her a small nod, a promise unspoken, and then they were gone, riding toward the horizon. The sound of the engines faded into the distance, leaving behind a silence so deep that even the wind seemed to hesitate. Clara stood frozen, the envelope trembling in her hand. Her knees weakened as everything caught up with her. The fear, the humiliation, and now, the overwhelming wave of relief. She looked down at Hazel, who was still holding the new doll close to her chest. The little girl's tears had dried, replaced by something softer in her eyes. Trust. Clara knelt down and wrapped her arms around her daughter, pressing her forehead against hers. "It's over, baby," she whispered. "We're safe now." Hazel nodded faintly, her tiny fingers clutching the doll's blue dress. "They helped us, Mommy," she said in a small voice. Clara smiled through her tears. Yes, they did, in their own way. That night, for the first time in months, Clara slept without fear. The next morning, when she walked back toward the factory gates to collect her things, she stopped in shock. The factory was closed. A handwritten sign hung crooked on the gate. Operations suspended until further notice. Word spread quickly through the small town. The factory manager and his crew hadn't returned. Some said they'd been fired. Others whispered that they'd simply left town. No one really knew. But everyone knew why. Clara didn't speak of it again. She simply packed her things, took Hazel's hand, and walked away with her head held high. For the first time in years, she didn't feel small. As the days turned into weeks, Clara found work at a local school cafeteria. It didn't pay much, but it was honest, peaceful work. Hazel started drawing again, pictures of bikes and angels and a doll with a blue dress. Whenever someone asked about it, she'd smile shyly and say, they were the good guys. Months later, on a quiet Sunday morning, Clara heard the rumble of motorcycles again. She rushed outside, heart racing, and saw 5 figures in leather vests pulling up by the roadside. The leader dismounted and nodded to her, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. "You're doing all right?" he asked. Clara nodded. "Better than we were." He looked down at Hazel, who was holding her doll, and said softly, "Take care of your mom, little one." Hazel grinned, her eyes wide with admiration. "I will." The biker smiled. then handed Clara a folded note before turning to leave. When she opened it, her breath caught. Inside was a simple message written in rough handwriting. "The world needs more people like you, Clara. Keep believing in good." Clara stood there long after they were gone, the sound of their engines fading into the horizon. She folded the note carefully and tucked it into her pocket. That day, she finally understood something the world had been trying to teach her all along. That kindness, docility always come from soft hands or gentle voices. Sometimes it rides in on a Harley, covered in dust and leather, carrying the heart of an angel. As she and Hazel walked home, hand in hand, the little girl looked up and said, "Mommy, do you think they'll come back someday?" Clara smiled at the road ahead. "Maybe not," she said softly, "but people like them never really leave. They just ride towards someone else who needs help. And somewhere beyond the clouds of dust." 5 engines thundered into the distance, loud, fierce, and filled with purpose. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to USA KOTHA, where every story reminds us that compassion still lives, even in the toughest hearts.